Hey friends, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Tes of Masechta Shabbis. That's Daf 99. We're almost up to the 100 mark, which is pretty cool, right? Right. Today we're going to finish up with a few of the Mishkani kinds of things from yesterday, and then I don't know how the Gemara managed to do this, but they managed to throw us right into the thick of Eruvin kind of stuff. Remember the stuff that we loved from the first 10 daf of the Masechta? Well, here's our opportunity to jump back into that. So we're going to be talking about Reshus harabims and Reshus hayachids and Carmelises and Makom Peturas and all that fun stuff. So let's just jump in now, and hope you enjoy. Okay, Daf Tzadi Ches Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom of the daf, the last line on the page. Tanu Rabbanan charutzim hayu krashim, v'chalulim hayu adanim. Great. Okay, if you look at on Tzadi Ches Amud Beis, so there's this. I'm going to provide you with this photo of this diagram of one of the beams in the Mishkan. So if you look all the way at the bottom on the tefach, all the way at the bottom, you can kind of see that that basically the krashim, these beams, they had handles, so to speak, on the bottom. And though what would happen is there would be these braces, and so each one of the krashim had these two kind of handles on the bottom, so to speak, and you would slip them into these braces on the bottom so that they would stay. They would kind of keep the krashim in place. So basically what you would have is, so remember the width of the beams were an amma and a half. So what you would have is sort of cut out from the bottom of the beam, let's say, you would have a quarter of an amma cut out, and then you would have a handle for another quarter of an amma. Then you would have another quarter of an amma space, then another quarter of an amma space, so I guess half an amma space, then another one of these handles that was a quarter of an amma wide, and then another quarter of an amma space. And you'd basically be able to get these rings around the krashim, if that makes sense. So Tanu Rabbanan charutzim hayu krashim, so the krashim, these beams were etched out or something. I don't know what the word is, but you would cut out these handles in the krashim at the bottom. V'chalulim hayu adanim, and the braces were chalulim, they were hollow in the middle, and basically you would stick the bottom of the krashim into these braces, and the braces would hold them in place. V'nir in krasin bilulaos ki kochavim barakia, and remember we said yesterday that the lower level of the covering of the Mishkan was made up of 10 of these strips of woven threads, and each one was 4 amos wide. So it was made up of, so basically you would sew together 5 of these strips, and then you would sew together the other 5 of those strips, and then you would connect the two pieces, right, that each one was 20 amos, I don't know if wide, I think wide is the word. So then you would basically, there would be loops at the end of each of these two groups of 5 of these strips, and then you would connect them together using hooks, and these hooks would look if you would look up at them and you would see these hooks, it would look like stars in the sky. Sounds very cool, right? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Yireos hatachtonos shel tcheles v'shel agamon v'shel tolas shani v'shel sheish. So the first layer of covering of the Mishkan, the lower layer, was of tcheles wool and purple wool and scarlet wool, as well as linen. Ve'elyonos shomaisei izim, and the upper covering was, of course, made out of goat hair. Ugdol chachma shenemar be'elyonos yosem mima shenemar betachtonos, and the wisdom that was required for the goat hair covering was superior, was required more wisdom than required to make the lower level of coverings of the Mishkan. Because by the lower level of covering, the woven level. It says that all the women that had wisdom of heart, so they would spin these threads. But it says by the goat hairs that any of the women whose hearts were inspired with wisdom, they would spin the goat hair ones. So I guess inspired with wisdom is a more significant level of wisdom than simply possessing wisdom. Vitanya, we learn in the Brisa, Mishum Rabbi Nechemia, the name of Rabbi Nechemia, Shatuv ba'izim v'tavu mina izim, that they would wash the goat hairs while they were still on the goat, as well as they would spin the goat hair threads even while the hair was still on the goats. I guess that was a very fancy kind of preparation. Okay, so the Mishnah had said that you have two balconies opposite each other, two Reshus harabims, and you throw from one to the other, and there's a Reshus, you had two Reshus hayachids, two balconies, and you throw from one to the other, and there's a Reshus harabim in the middle. Now, the Gemara doesn't really talk about that case so much, but the Gemara is really just talking about like the wagons and beams from the Mishkan. So, Amar Rav Mishum Reb Chia. So Rav says the name of his uncle Reb Chia, and we saw this yesterday. Agalos, when it comes to these wagons, if the beams were transported on Tachtein, Uvenein, V'tzidein, Reshus harabim. So underneath them, in between the two wagons, as well as on their sides where the wheels and the axles were, so Reshus harabim. Amar Abaye, Ben Agala la Agala, Kim lo Orech Agala. Says Abaye that between the two wagons, right? Remember, there was a wagon in front and wagon behind, and then next to it, there was another wagon in front and wagon behind. And we're talking about the area in between the two rows of wagons, okay? So it says Abai, Ben Agala Agala Kim La'orech Agala, that between the two rows of wagons was the equivalent of the length of a wagon. V'chama orech Agala Hey Amos. And how long is the length of a wagon? It's 5 amos. So the idea being that between the two rows of wagons was 5 amos. Lama li, how come I need the length of a wagon to be 5 amos? Bidalad ufalga sagi, all I should really need is 4.5, because if you would lay down the beams on the wagon widthwise, well, we said that we would lay down, we can get 3 rows of beams widthwise, because each one is 1.5 amos. So why do you need 5 amos? Just have 4.5 amos for the 3 beams. And or if you want to say that it's on its thinner side, which is 1 amma, so sure, so we said that you would put 4 of those beams on their 1 amma thickness. Well, so there were those, remember we talked about the tubes yesterday that were on the outside of the beams? So you wouldn't exactly be able to like stack them up, immediately one next to the other, but, even because you'd have to leave room for those tubing, but even so, you shouldn't need an extra amma to make it 5 amos, even 4.5 should suffice. So either way, 4.5 amos should be enough. How come it had to be 5 amos? So the Gemara answers, well, you don't necessarily want to stuff in the beams too tight. So we give 5 amos, it's enough room for the beams to sit there comfortably. Amar Rava, tzidei agala kimlo rochav agala. Says Rava that the sides of the agala are like the width of the agala. Okay? V'chama rochav agala shtei amos v'mechza. And how wide is the wagon? It's 2.5 amos. So the width of the wagon is 2.5 amos, and we're saying that the sides of the wagons, where there would be the axle and the wheel, so in total that was also 2.5 amos, meaning spread out between the two sides. So on one side you would have 1.25 amma, and on the other side it would be 1.25 amma as well. And in total the entire width of the wagon and the wheels was 5 amos as well. Lama li, how come I need the width of the wagon to be 2.5 amos? Ba'amasa ufalga sagia, all you should really need is for the width to be 1.5 amos. Kiechid lidadu krashim. And the Gemara says, if it was only 1.5 amos, well then the beams might fall off, right? Because remember, the beams were kind of across the wagon, they're lengthwise, right? Meaning you would have if the wagon took up 5 amos of space, so you'd have 2.5 amos of beam kind of sticking out on either end. Now, if the wagon itself was only 1.5 amos wide as opposed to 2.5 amos wide, remember, and then there was another 2.5 amos for the wheels and the axles. But if the actual wagon itself, that part in the middle, was only 1.5 amos wide, we're concerned that the beams that are overhanging on the side might tip over. So therefore 2.5 amos is enough to prevent the beams from tipping over. Now we know that we assume that the width of a Reshus harabim is 16 amos. The question is, how come? If we're learning out the width of the Reshus harabim from the Mishkan, well, the Mishkan 15 avai, and the Mishkan it was only 15 amos, right? Because if we're learning out the width of Reshus harabim based on the wagons, that each of the wagons was 5 amos wide, right? Because between the wheels and the axles and the wagon, it was 5 amos, and we know that there was 5 amos in between each one. So, and we're not talking about the krashim, right? We're not taking into account the krashim, right? The krashim were 10 amos long, and you have them next to each other, so it's going to be a total of 20 amos, right? But we're not talking about the krashim because the krashim were not actually in Reshus harabim, right? And the krashim were above 10 tfachim over the ground, so they weren't in Reshus harabim. We're not going to determine Reshus harabim based on the height of the krashim. However, the wagons themselves were in Reshus harabim. They were within 10 tfachim of the ground, and therefore, in determining the width of Reshus harabim, we're going to look at the width of the wagons. Now, each wagon was 5 amos wide and 5 amos in between them, so that's a total of 15 amos. Okay, so how come we say that a Reshus harabim is 16 amos? So the Gemara answers, Amsa Yisera Avai. But there was an extra amma, meaning when the wagons would be traveling from one destination to another, from one location to some other destination, so they would have to travel on a road that was at least 16 amos wide. How come? Because you'd have 15 amos for the 2 wagons, and then you would have a Levi walking behind the wagons, and he would be taking notice to see if any of the krashim, if any of the beams were slipping. And if they were, he would, squeeze himself next to the wagon in a half amma area next to the wagon on the outside and try to adjust the beams. So therefore each wagon had a half amma area on its outside extremity where a Levi would be able to slip in order to fix any beams if he needed to. Therefore, if you add a half amma from either side of the wagon, so then you get that additional amma, and it's 15 plus 1 is 16. That's how we get our 16 amma width for Reshus harabim. Friends, new Mishnah. Chulia sabor. Okay, so if you think about a pit, and you dig out the contents of the pit, and then you have all this dirt around the pit, and you kind of shape that dirt into almost like a fence around the pit so that nobody falls in. So that's the chulia sabor. Ve'asela. Okay, and a rock. Imagine you have a big rock. It's 10 tfachim tall. It's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. So, chulia sabor ve'asela she'en gvo and asara, that they are 10 amis tall. 10 tfachim tall. V'rochban arba, and they are 4 tfachim wide. Hanoto me'en, so somebody who takes something from them, v'anosen al gaban, or somebody puts something on top of them, chayav, so he's going to be chayav for hotzah. Pachos became pater, but if they are less than 10 tfachim tall, or less than 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, so then taking in, taking out, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be a separate reshus. Okay, so when we're talking about this rock, think about some kind of a big rock that's 10 tfachim tall, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. So it's its own reshus hayachid, right? And you're in Reshus harabim, so if you take epis and you put it in, and you put it on top of this rock, or if you take something from the rock and you bring it out to you in Reshus harabim, so then it's going to be hotzah or achnasa, whatever it might be. Now, in terms of this pit, so imagine you have a pit, and we're going to talk about this pit basically for the rest of the daf, actually. But anyways, so if you have some kind of a pit, to make things easier, let's just say the pit is 10 tfachim deep, so it's a reshus hayachid, and then you have this little wall area around it, this fenced off area around it. So if you take something from within that fenced off area and bring it out to Reshus harabim, or if you take something from Reshus harabim and put it into that fenced off area, you are going to be chayiv to bring a korban chatas, see at the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara wants to know, Lama li lemisnei chulias habor ve'asela, lesnei habor ve'asela. Oh, so the Gemara wants to know, why is the Mishnah mentioning this like fence around the pit? Meaning, what's the chiddush of meaning how come the Mishnah wants to teach us about a rock? Well, it wants to teach us something that is elevated above the ground, right? You have a rock, it's elevated above the ground 10 tfachim, and we're saying, if you put something on top of it, or take something from on top of it and bring it down to you in Reshus harabim, you're going to be chayiv. And why is it bringing a pit? Because it wants to teach the other extreme, which is when you have a Reshus hayachid that's dug into the ground, inside of a pit. And if the pit is 10 tfachim deep, 4 tfachim wide, so it's going to be a Reshus hayachid, and you're going to be chayiv for putting things in the pit, for taking things out of the pit. What's the deal with the fence, right? Why don't you just say a rock that's 10 tfachim tall, and 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, or a pit that's 10 tfachim deep and 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide? What's the deal with the fence? Why are we mentioning the fence? So the Gemara asks, how come we're mentioning this fence around a pit as well as a rock? Habor ve'asela, teach the pit itself as well as a rock. So the Gemara answers, well, Rabbi Yochanan. This Mishnah is a support for Rabbi Yochanan. How come? Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan says that a pit, as well as its fence around it, join to make 10. So that's pretty cool. So imagine you have a pit, and the pit is 5 tfachim deep. Okay, so obviously 5 tfachim deep is not a Reshus hayachid. You need to be 10 tfachim deep. However, well, if you dug out 5 tfachim's worth of dirt, so guess what you did with those 5 tfachim's worth of dirt? You used it to make a fence around the pit, and that fence itself was 5 tfachim tall. So between the 5 tfachim of the depth of the pit and the 5 tfachim height of this fence that you just constructed around it, you have 10 tfachim. So the point is that they can be mitzvah, they can join together in order to create the depth of 10 tfachim that you need. And therefore, if you take an object from Reshus harabim and you put it anywhere within that fence, whether it's inside of the pit, whether it's inside the area next to the pit, you're going to be chayiv because it's all considered a Reshus hayachid that is 10 tfachim deep and 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. I don't know if I said Reshus harabim, but I certainly meant Reshus hayachid. Okay, so 4 lines from the bottom of the Gemara on Sarites Amud Aleph. Misayele Rabbi Yochanan. So this supports Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan bor v'chulyasa, a pit and its fence that surrounds it. Mitzdarfin la'asara. They can both join together to create the height or the depth of 10 tfachim. Tanya nami achi. We also have a brisa to support this. Bor b'Reshus harabim. Okay, if you have a pit in Reshus harabim, amuka yud, that is 10 tfachim deep. Okay, v'rechava arba, and it's 4 tfachim wide. Ein memalin imena b'Shabbos. Okay, so you can't fill up water from it on Shabbos. So kilu, if it is a pit, if it is a water pit, okay, and there's water darting, so you can't take a so you wouldn't be able to fill up water from this pit that's 10 tfachim deep because it's a Reshus hayachid and you're standing with Reshus harabim. That would be a problem. Ela imkein asu la mechitza gavoa yud tfachim. Unless you first made a fence around it that's 10 tfachim tall. If the fence is 10 tfachim tall, well then the area around the pit is a Reshus hayachid. So you just walk into that Reshus hayachid, then you could take water out of the pit and drink from it, and that's fine because you're in a Reshus hayachid. The pit itself is a Reshus hayachid. It's fine. Vein shosin imena b'Shabbos. Right, and this pit that's in Reshus harabim that has water in it that doesn't have any kind of fence around it, you would not be able to drink its water. If there was like some kind of a bucket in the pit and you can put the bucket in the pit and get some water, you can't even lean over the pit to drink from this bucket. Ela imkein ichnis la rosho v'rubo. You would have to bring in his head and most of his body inside of the pit in order to be considered kind of in the Reshus hayachid. If he has less than his head and most of his body, well, then he's in Reshus harabim. The water is in Reshus hayachid. You wouldn't be able to access it like that. Uvor v'chuliyasa mitzdarfen l'asara. However, says the Brisa, that if we're trying to define, this area that would be a Reshus hayachid, that you'd be able to, take water from the pit into there and drink from it and drink from the pit. If you have, let's say, this area, this fence around it isn't necessarily 10 tefachim tall, but if you combine it with the depth of the pit, it would be, you would have 10 tefachim in total, at least. So then it would be considered Reshus hayachid, and, you would be able to take water from the pit into that area or drink from the pit, and it would be fine. So we see that is like Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the fence around the pit would be able to join together with the depth of the pit in order to create 10 tefachim, and for it to create a Reshus hayachid. Okay. By minei Rav Matche me Rabba. So Rav Matche asks a kasha from Rabba. Amud b'Reshus harabim gavoa yud v'rachav daled. Okay. So if you have a beam in Reshus harabim, and it is 10 tefachim tall, and it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. Okay, obviously we all know what that means. So Reshus hayachid. V'zarek v'nach agabav, and you throw epis, you're in Reshus harabim, you throw epis, and it lands on top of this beam, which is a Reshus hayachid. So mistama what? Mistama is chayiv, right? Threw something from Reshus harabim, landed in Reshus hayachid. Should be otzah, no? Or achnasa. Mau. So do we say Hariya Akira be'isr, Hariya Nacha be'isr? So do we say, like I was just saying, that there was an Akira be'isr and a Nacha be'isr? Kilu, you had an Akira in Reshus harabim and a Nacha in Reshus hayachid, you should be chayiv. O Dilma, or perhaps Kevan demimakom p'tur ka'asya lo. So interesting. Or do we say, well, lemaise, in order for this object to travel from where you are in the Reshus hayachid, from where you are in the Reshus harabim and land in the Reshus hayachid, which is 10 tefachim tall, well, obviously it's going to have to travel in the air above 10 tefachim, because remember, it's landing on a platform that is 10 tefachim tall. So in order for it to land on a platform that's 10 tefachim tall, on a beam or a pillar that's 10 tefachim tall, it's going to have to come into it's landing on top of the pillar, so it's going to have to descend to some degree from above 10 tefachim, and above 10 tefachim in the air, of course, is a makom p'tur. That's the question. So Rabba said to Rav Matche, Masnisani. So he says, well, that's our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that somebody who puts some, what was it? Hanota me'en v'anosin agabun chayiv. Right? What did it say? It says that if you, let's say, have a rock that's 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. If you take something and you put it on this rock, or you take it from this rock, you're going to be chayiv, even though it's going to be going through a makom p'tur. So, also Shaila Rav Yosef. So Rav Matche then went and he asked Rav Yosef, Amalei Masnisani. Rav Yosef gave the same answer as Rabbah. He said, look, it's our Mishnah. Of course you're going to be chayiv. Also Shaila Abaye. Rav Matche went and he asked Abaye, Amalei Masnisani. Abaye gave the same answer as Rav Yosef and Rabbah. It's our Mishnah. Of course you're going to be chayiv. Amalu kul biroko da adade tafisu. Interesting. He says to them, you guys all spit the same spit. Okay. I guess that wasn't necessarily supposed to be a compliment, but okay. I guess he disagreed with them. Amrullah, they said to him, "Va'ad lo tizbra." So they said to Rav Matche, "You don't agree with us? What, you think that kilu he would be potter?" V'atanan v'anotameyan v'anosen al gabun chayev. What about our Mishnah that says that if you take something from, let's say, this rock that is 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, if you take something from it, or if you put something on it, you're going to be chayev. So why should this be any different when you throw something from Reshus harabims and it lands on a pillar that is 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide? Amelu, so Rav Matche said to them, Dilma masnisin b'machat. Maybe our Mishnah is talking about a needle. something that can travel, that is really small, and you could theoretically take it from Reshus Harabim and put it on this rock, in the Reshus Hayachid, without having to enter into above 10 tfachim, which would be a makom p'tur. B'machat nami efshad lo medalya purta. But they said, even so, even if it's a needle, it's still going to have to go into a makom p'tur a little bit, right? Meaning, maybe not a lot, but in order for this needle to get from you in Reshus Harabim to the top of this rock that is 10 tfachim tall, it's going to have to go into a makom p'tur. It's going to have to go above 10 tfachim, a little bit at least. So Rav Matre answers, the islay mursha inami duami b'charitza. Well, you could say either there's some kind of protrusion from the rock, right, that is not 10 tfachim tall, meaning the rock itself is a Reshus Hayachid because it's 10 tfachim tall and 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. Right? Now, if there's a protrusion from the rock on the side of it, even if it is lower than 10 tfachim, it would still be considered part of the Reshus Hayachid. And therefore, he could have just placed something on that protrusion, and that's why he will be chayiv, because he's in Reshus Harabim. He's putting something on this protrusion of this rock that's considered part of Reshus Hayachid, and he was able to basically have an akira in Reshus Harabim, anach in Reshus Hayachid, without having to go into the makom p'tur. Or else he could say that it's talking about where there was some kind of what was it? What would they call it? A crevice in the rock. You were able to get this needle on top of the rock through some kind of a crevice where you didn't necessarily have to go through makom p'tur world. So that is how Rav Matre wants to respond to Abaye and Rava and Rabba. No, not Rava. Abaye and Rav Yosef and Rabba, by saying how you might get something from Reshus Harabim to Reshus Hayachid without having to go through a makom p'tur. And therefore, he was asking, what if you threw something from Reshus Harabim to Reshus Hayachid and it went through a makom p'tur? Would you be chayiv? Would you be pater? So Rav Matre wants to argue that maybe you should be pater since it goes to a makom p'tur, but Pashtus is, the Mishnah is saying that you'd be chayiv even though it goes to a makom p'tur if you throw it. Fine. Amar of Miyasha. So now instead of Miyasha, by Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan asked the question, Kosel b'Reshus Harabim gavoa yud ve'enu rachav arba. So what if you have a wall, and this wall is in Reshus Harabim, and the wall is 10 tfachim tall, but it is not 4 by 4 tfachim wide. Umukaf lekarmelis, and it's surrounding a karmelis. It's surrounding a karmelis area, some big area that isn't necessarily a public area, so it's not a Reshus Harabim, but it's also not a Reshus Hayachid. So you have this wall, and it's not 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, so it's not its own Reshus Hayachid, but it's surrounding a karmelis, and it's basically making this karmelis into a Reshus Hayachid, because it's surrounding the karmelis. V'aso Reshus Hayachid, and it makes this karmelis into Reshus Hayachid. V'zarek v'nachal gabav, and he threw epis, and it landed on this wall. Now, if it landed inside of the wall, i.e. inside the Reshus Hayachid, obviously it would be chayav. But here, it's landing on this wall. Now, this wall doesn't have 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, so therefore it's not a Reshus Hayachid, right? So the question is, what do we say? Mi amrina, do we say, kevet einu rachav daled makom p'turhu? Do we say, well, lemaisa, this wall doesn't have 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim width, so it's a makom p'tur. Okay, so you'd be pater for throwing it on it. O dilma, or maybe kevet asar Reshus Hayachid command mali damya. Or do we say, well, since this wall, even though it itself might not have a thickness of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, but it's basically enclosing this whole area and making the entire area a Reshus Hayachid, so maybe we treat it as if the whole area was all filled in which case the top of the wall is basically just flush with the entire area that it's enclosing, and it's just considered one has a very large surface that's quite a lot bigger than 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, because we view the entire area as if it's this entire karmelis as if it's filled in, and this wall is now just part of that filled in karmelis, in which case it would be a Reshus Hayachid. That's our question. Amar Ula Kavachomer. So Ula says, well, it's a Kavachomer. La'acherim ose mechitza la'atzma lo kol sheken. Well, if this wall is going to make this whole area into a Reshus Hayachid, and it's and it's considered a good enough wall for other things, Well, latzmo lo kol shekin, for itself, wouldn't it be considered a significant enough wall to be considered Reshus hayachid? Idmarnam, we also learn in a statement of Amoraim, Amar B'chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, B'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kosel b'Reshus harabim, if you have a wall in Reshus harabim, Gavoa Yud, that's 10 tefachim tall, Ve'eno Rachav Arba, but it's not 4 by 4 tefachim wide, Umukav the Carmelis, and it's surrounding a Carmelis, V'asar Reshus hayachid, and it makes the Carmelis Reshus hayachid, Hazorik v'nachal gabo chayav, and somebody throws that piss and it lands on top of this wall that is 10 tefachim tall, but is not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. However, it's surrounding a whole area and making that whole area Reshus hayachid. Well, if it lands on this wall, you're going to be chayav, because lacher mosam mechitza la'atzma lo kol shekin, right? Because if this wall is good enough to make the whole other area a Reshus hayachid, well, it's good enough to make itself to be considered Reshus hayachid as well. By Rabbi Yochanan asks a question, Bor Tisha, what if you have a pit? This pit is 9 tefachim deep, okay? So it's not a Reshus hayachid, it's a makom p'tur. V'akar mimena chulya, but you dig out of it another tefach. And you take that dirt that you dug out of it and you put it on the side of the pit, i.e. in Reshus harabim. So meaning, you're standing in Reshus harabim, you stick your shovel into this pit. At the time that you stick your shovel into the pit, it's not a Reshus hayachid. Okay? It's just 9 tefachim deep. It's a makom p'tur. But you dig an extra tefach. And now it's 10 tefachim deep. So now it's a Reshus hayachid. And you're putting the dirt now in Reshus harabim around it to make this bank. So again, so by Rabbi Yochanan asks, Bor Tisha, if you have this pit that's 9 tefachim deep, v'akar mimena chulya, and then you dug out of it another tefach to make this bank around it, v'shlima la'asara, and now the pit is in fact 10 tefachim deep, so it's a Reshus hayachid now. Mau, do we say Yechayev or Potter? Do we say Akiras Chepetz V'asiyas Mechitza B'adei Adadi Ka'asu Mechayev? Do we say, well, digging out this dirt and making this 10 tefachim deep wall happen at the same exact time, and therefore you're chayev? Kilo, at the time that you remove this dirt, you're basically now removing it from a pit that is 10 tefachim deep. And you're chayev, odim alo mechayev. Or do we say, no, at the time that you stuck in your shovel, it wasn't 10 tefachim deep, it was 9 tefachim deep. And therefore, you're going to be potter. Okay, and if you're going to say, well, since initially the wall was not 10 tefachim deep, it was only 9 tefachim deep at the beginning, therefore you're potter. Okay, but what about in the following case? What about if you have a bor yud? What if you have a pit that is 10 tefachim deep? And now you add dirt to it to make it no longer. So you take dirt from Reshus harabim and you throw it into the pit. And the pit, when you throw it in, when you throw the dirt in, the pit is 10 tefachim deep. But davka, by throwing it in, you're now making it less than 10 tefachim deep. So Mao, do we say anachas chayvetz v'siluk mechitza b'adei adadi kasu? Do we say, well, at the same exact time that you're putting the dirt in the pit, you're also removing the depth of the pit. So it's no longer 10 tefachim deep, so maybe you're potter. So do we say michayev or lo michayev? Do we say that you're chayev since when you put the dirt in, it was 10 tefachim deep, and therefore you're basically taking dirt from Reshus harabim and putting it in Reshus hayachid? Or do we say, well, at the exact instant that you're putting the dirt into the pit, you're also making it less than 10 tefachim deep, and therefore you would be potter? Tivsha lemididei. So the Gemara wants to suggest, well, maybe for this 10 tefachim deep example, we can answer it from Rabbi Yochanan himself. Why? The Tanan, as we're going to learn tomorrow. Hazorik arba ames bakotel lemala me'asar tefachim kezorik ba'avir lemata me'asar kezorik ba'aretz. If you throw epis at a wall and it hits the wall above 10 tefachim, so it's as if you just kind of threw it in the air and you're going to be potter. If it hits the wall below 10 tefachim, so then it's going to be as if you threw it on the ground and you're going to be chayev because you threw it 4 amos. V'azorik ba'aretz arba amos chayev, and somebody throws just on the ground 4 amos is going to be chayev. Ve'avinan ba, and we ask v'alo nach. Meaning, if you throw something at a wall, it's just going to bounce back from where you came from. Now, if you're standing 4 amos away from the wall, if you're standing 4 amos away from the wall, okay, and you throw something at the wall, well, it's just going to bounce back, and now it's going to be less than 4 amos away. It's going to be less now than 4 amos away. And therefore, how could it be that you'd be chayiv? So Rabbi Yochanan answers, well, it's talking about some kind of a fatty fig. Okay, some kind of fig that you chuck against the wall and it gets stuck there. Okay? And we're saying that if you throw this fig against the wall and it gets stuck lower than 10 tfachim, okay? I hope I wasn't saying amos until now. But no, if you throw it and it's above 10 tfachim on the wall, it's going to be like it's suspended in the air and you're going to be pater. If it's lower than 10 tfachim, it's going to be like it landed on the ground and you're going to be chayev, okay? The question is, how come you're going to be chayev? Because this fig is stuck against the wall. And therefore, if you're standing exactly 4 tfachim, no, not tfachim, if you're standing 4 amos away from the wall, okay? And you're standing 4 amos away from the wall. You throw this fig and it smacks against the wall lower than 10 tfachim from the ground, you're going to be chayev. However, this fig is taking up space. And therefore, even though you're standing 4 amos away from the wall, but the fig isn't actually 4 amos away from you because the fig takes up space. And therefore, you have to subtract the space that the fig takes up from the 4 amos. Yet, right, how come he's chayev? How come me'arba amos? The space that the fig takes up is actually, you're going to have to subtract that from the 4 amos, and you didn't actually throw it a complete 4 amos. So, and yet we say that you're chayev. So we do seem to be saying that what's important is what, the way things start out. If right now, when I throw the fig, I'm 4 amos away from the wall, that's what's important. And therefore here also, when I have this pit that's 10 tfachim deep, okay, even though by throwing in the dirt, I'm now making it less than 10 tfachim, that is not what's important. What's important is that when I threw the dirt into the pit, it was 10 tfachim deep, and I should be chayev, right? So we say not necessarily. There's a difference between throwing the fig against the wall and putting the dirt into the pit. When I put the dirt into the pit, I'm actually being mivatel the pit. The pit was only a Reshus hayachid because it was 10 tfachim deep. By throwing the dirt, I'm undoing that. I'm canceling the pit. I'm canceling the Reshus hayachid, right? Whereas by the fig, I'm not like canceling the distance where I'm standing from. I'm standing 4 amos away from the wall. That's not going to change, right? And because of that, we say even though the fig might be taking up space, and theoretically I might want to subtract that from the distance of 4 amos, the fact of the matter is I'm still standing 4 amos away from the wall. And therefore, I can understand why Rabbi Yochanan would say that you're chayev there. However, maybe over here, when the pit started off as 10 tfachim deep, and now, when I put in this dirt, it's like being mevatel the Reshus hayachid. It's no longer 10 tfachim deep. So maybe that would be different. Rabbi Yochanan would say that maybe you're pater here. And we don't actually resolve this question of how to deal with these situations when, like, at the same exact time that you're doing the activity, it's like changing the status of the Reshus. We don't necessarily have a definitive answer. By Rava. Now Rava asks a very interesting question. Zarak daf v'nach al gabi yiseidis mahu. What if you have a peg? The peg is 10 tfachim tall, and it's in Reshus harabim. Now, the top of the peg is not 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. But what do? Listen what you do. You take a piece of board, the board is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, and you chuck it, and it lands on top of this peg. So now what do you have? L'maisa, now you have a peg that's 4 tfachim, that's 10 tfachim tall, with a platform on top of it that is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So, essentially now you have created a Reshus harabim. So what do we say? Not a Reshus harabim, a Reshus hayachid. So by Rava, wants to know, Zarak daf v'nachal gabi yiseidis mau. So if you throw a board that is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim and it lands on a peg that is 10 tfachim tall, well, mau. My kami ba'ile. The Gemara says, what do you mean? What's he asking? Anachas chepetz v'asiyas mechitza b'adei adadei ka'asu. Hanu de Rabbi Yochanan. What? I'm sorry. Anachas chepetz v'asiyas mechitza b'adei adadei ka'asu. Hanu de Rabbi Yochanan. Well, the landing of the board on top of the peg and the creation of this Reshus hayachid is happening at the same exact time, right? This peg was not a Reshus hayachid because it doesn't have a platform of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. You're chucking this board and it's landing on top of it. So mamish at the same instant that the board is landing on the peg, that is when we're creating this Reshus hayachid over here. That's the exact same question about, for example, what's the halacha when you dig up this bottom tefach of the pit to make it 10 tfachim, right? Do we say, well, at the time that you dug up the bottom right, that you dug it, it was only 9 tefachim deep, so you'd be pater? Or do we say, yeah, but by digging it, it makes the thing 10 tefachim deep, so therefore you're chayiv? It's the same thing over here. The time that you threw this object, well, where the place where it landed wasn't actually Reshus hayachid. But at the time that it landed, it memela became Reshus hayachid, so maybe then you should be chayiv for throwing something into Reshus hayachid. So it's just like the pit was unresolved, so this is also unresolved. So the Gemara answers, Ki kami bayale le Rava. Listen to this. What Rav is asking is, Kigon dezarik daf v'chefetz al gabav. He didn't just throw a board to land on this peg. He threw a board with epis, something on top of it, maybe an apple on top of it, and some of the apple didn't fall off of the board the whole time. So he threw a board with an apple on it, right? And then the board landed on the peg with the apple on top of it. Okay? So Kevin the bade hadade kaasu kanochas chefetz. So do we say, well, it's just the same exact thing as the case with the pit, right? Keilu, at the time that you threw the board, well, there was no Reshus hayachid, and therefore the Reshus hayachid is only being made when the board lands on it, and it's the same question as Rabbi Yochanan. Keilu, do we say that since at the time that it landed there was no Reshus hayachid to be pater, or do we say that at the time that it lands it makes Reshus hayachid, therefore you're chayiv? O Dilma. Or perhaps, Kevin delo efsher delo midala porta v'hadar nayich kasias mechitza v'anachas chevetz dami teku. Or do we say, well, since when the board and the apple are traveling in the air, the apple is going to be elevated at least slightly from the board at some point, and what's going to happen is the board is going to land on the peg, creating the Reshus hayachid, and then the apple is going to land on top of the board that already made the Reshus hayachid, so the apple's landing in Reshus hayachid, and you're going to be chayiv. The Gemara says, leave me alone. I don't know the answer. Go do something else. Okay. So let's review this stuff a little bit, friends. So a few more Mishkan measurements. We talked about the handles at the bottom of the beams a little bit, and then we talked a little bit about the space in between the carts and creating Reshus harabims, the minimum requirement of 16 amos for Reshus harabim. Then we got back into Erevin zone, right? We talked about a stone, a rock that is 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, or a pit that is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And to get that depth of 10 tefachim, you can even include the enclosed area around, the height of the enclosed area around the pit. We talked about throwing from Reshus harabim to a beam that is 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim tall. Right? So Rav Mordechai asked the question about would you be chayiv or not. So what he wanted to know is that, well, since it's traveling through a makom p'tur in order to get to this rock, or to this pillar, so he thinks that maybe you should be pater. Now Abaye and Rav Yosef and Rabba all answered, well, our Mishnah is talking about when you are putting something on a rock that is 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and we're saying that you are chayiv. So mistama, you would be chayiv here as well. And Mordechai said, yeah, but maybe our Mishnah is talking about a protrusion from a rock, or maybe some kind of way to get the thing on top of the rock without having to go through a makom p'tur. But the assumption seems to be that would be a pretty limited case. And if you would throw something from Reshus harabim to Reshus hayachid, to this like pillar in Reshus, this pillar that's 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, mistama, you would be chayiv. Then we talked about what happens if you have a wall that is 10 tefachim tall, but it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and it's surrounding a carmelis, right? So do we say that, well, since it's basically creating a Reshus hayachid, so we treat it as if the entire Reshus hayachid is filled in, and when you throw something and it lands on this wall, it would be kilu, you threw it into Reshus hayachid? Or do we say, look, lemaisa, it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, so if somebody lands on it, you're going to be pater. So we make a kal v'chomer, right? If it makes this whole area that it's surrounding into Reshus hayachid, so certainly it itself should be treated as a Reshus hayachid, and you'll be chayiv. Then we talk about what if you have a pit that is 9 tefachim deep, and then you dig out another tefach and put it in Reshus harabim. So do we say, well, at the time that you dug it out, it wasn't yet 10 tefachim deep, so therefore you'll be pater? Or do we say, yeah, but by digging it out, you make it 10 tefachim deep, and therefore you'll be chayiv for taking it out of there and putting it in Reshus harabim? And then we ask the question, what about the opposite? What if it's 10 tefachim deep, but then you throw some dirt in there, and now it's no longer 10 tefachim deep? Do we say, well, at the time that you put the dirt in, it was 10 tefachim, therefore you'll be chayiv? Or do we say, yeah, but by putting in the dirt, you're making it no longer a Reshus hayachid, therefore you should be pater? It kind of went unresolved. So, yeah. Anyways, friends, that was daf 99 of Masechta Shabbos. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy your day or your night. Peace.